पूर्वक्षः शीलतङ्कान् खलाये शीलतङ्कान् खलाये हितो नरसिंह परतो नरसिंह हितो नरसिंह परतो नरसिंह यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंह यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंह बहे नरसिंह हृदये नरसिंह बहे नरसिंह हृदये नरसिंह नरसिंहमादिं शरणं प्रपदे नरसिंहमादिं शरणं प्रपदे तव करकमलवरे नखा अद्भुत सिंह दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवधृता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे तव करकमलवरे नखा अद्भुत सिंह दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवधृता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय नरसिंहदेव 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 जय नरसिंहदेव जय प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल नरसिंहदेव भगवान की जय प्रहलाद महाराज की जय शिल प्रभुपाद की जय राधा श्याम सुंदर की जय जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा माई की जय श्री गौर निताय की जय परम पूज्य शिल प्रभुपाद की जय हरे कृष्ण
हरे कृष्णा निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल
हरि हरि
थैंक यू माता जी
हरि बोल प्रभु जी
हरे कृष्णा Dravida Prabhu you are there
Can you hear me?
yes Prabhu
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna thank you very much for joining Prabhu and giving your association let me quickly introduce and then you can take it over
Okay.
Hare Krishna thank you
Are we all set?
yes His Grace Dravida Prabhu joined ISKCON in March of 1973 in New York and was initiated by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada in January of 1974. He began his editing career in 1975 when he became one of the editors for Back to Godhead magazine, and also participated in 17 books in 2 months marathon in that year, ending with finished production of Srila Prabhupada's translation of and commentary on the Bengali classic Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. In October of 1978, he went to work as an editor for BVT, but in October of 1979, it was back to Godhead. In 83, he joined Hridayanandas Goswami Maharaj and Gopi Parandan Prabhu and others in producing the 10th, 11th, and 12th cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. Herculean task, you can imagine. In 1989, he moved to San Diego, where he still resides. There he has continued his work with BBT, helping to produce such books as The Journey of Discovery, The Quest of Enlightenment, A Second Chance. We all know this is Ajamila's book, Second Chance, amazing book. And Srila Prabhupada's yearly Vyas Puja book. In addition, he has helped produce final versions of Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Isopanishad, Krishna book, and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. It was in 1990 that he recorded the entire Bhagavad Gita as it is. Thank you so much, Prabhu. We're very fortunate to have you. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to you.
Sanjay. So first I'd like to offer my humble obeisance to all the assembled Vaishnava, Vancha, Kalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhu Behavicha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So I picked a topic tonight that is perennial interest to all devotees, and that is, how did we come here? How did we fall from the spiritual world, and how we can get back to Godhead? So in Srila Prabhupada's books, he deals with this subject in various places, and one that's most prominent is in the 4th canto, chapter 28, beginning text 53. Before we chant this verse and read part of the purport, just to give some context, some of you may be familiar with the 4th canto. There's a whole allegory there spoken by Narada Muni to King Prachana Barishat concerning Puranjan. Puranjan is all of us. Puranjan means the resident of the body. Puran Jiva. Puran means the city of the body, 9 gates. And Jana is the person or the Jiva. So it's a general description of conditioned life. And Puranjan eventually he gets married, he gets many, many children and grandchildren. And eventually the time factor forces him to leave that body, as it does all of us. And he takes birth as a woman because he's thinking of his wife at the end. And but this woman eventually marries a king who's a great devotee. And so eventually when he's retired, she goes with him, Vanaprastha, and he is meditating, and eventually he leaves his body, and she's bereft of her protector, and so she's lamenting, and she's preparing to go into the fire, the funeral pyre there, when an unknown Brahmin comes. And that unknown Brahmin is actually the super soul. And the super soul is now speaking to her, who is the Puranjan reincarnated. And in this purport, in these verses, Srila Prabhupada gives a very explicit explanation of how we fell from the spiritual world. So I'm going to chant this verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is 4th canto, chapter 28, text 53. Api smarasi chatmanam avigyata sakam sakhe yatva mam padamandichan bhauma bhogaratogataha. The Brahmin said, "My dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world." And in Srila Prabhupada's purport, he writes, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 7:27, Ichadvesha samutena dvandvamohena bharata sarvabhutani sammoham sarge yanti pravantapa. O scion of Bharat, Arjun, O conqueror of the foe. All living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. I'm going to have to close this window. Sorry, we have an ice cream truck outside making noise. So all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. And Srila Prabhupada writes, this verse is an explanation of how the living entity falls down into this material world. In the spiritual world, there is no duality, nor is there hate. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expands himself into many. In order to enjoy bliss more and more, the Supreme Lord expands himself in different categories. As mentioned in the Varaha Purana, he expands himself in Vishnu Tattva, he's called Svanksha expansion, and in his marginal potency, the Vibhinangsha, or the living entities. These expanded living entities are innumerable, just as the minute molecules of sunshine are innumerable expansions of the sun. The Vibhinangsha expansions, the marginal potencies of the Lord, are the living entities. When the living entities desire to enjoy themselves, they develop a consciousness of duality and come to hate the service of the Lord. This is the dvesha in Icha Dvesha. We want to enjoy separately Icha, and we hate dvesha, the service of the Lord. In this way, the living entities fall into the material world. And next comes a verse Prabhu would often quote in this regard. In the Prema Vivarta, it is said, Krishna Bahimukha Hamna Bhoga Vancha Kare Nikatasta Mayatare Japatiya Dhare. The natural position of the living entity is to serve the Lord in a transcendental loving attitude. When the living entity wants to become Krishna himself or imitate Krishna, he falls down into the material world. Since Krishna is the Supreme Father, his affection for the living entity is eternal. When the living entity falls down into the material world, the Supreme Lord, through his Svanksha expansion, his Paramatma, keeps company with the living entity. In this way, the living entity may someday return home back to Godhead. And I'm going to skip the rest of the purport here and go on to the next verse, and then we'll discuss. Just read a little bit of this. So now the Paramatma, in the form of this unknown Brahmin friend, continues speaking to the reborn Puranjana. My dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like the Manasa lake. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. And just really quickly, a little bit of this purport. The original home of the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, both the Lord and the living entities live together very peacefully. Since the living entity remains engaged in the service of the Lord, they both share a blissful life in the spiritual world. However, when the living entity wants to enjoy himself, he falls down into the material world. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So if you would allow me, I wrote a little poem some years ago encapsulating this process of falling from the spiritual world and also the return back to Godhead. And if you allow me to share this with you, it's kind of an interesting little construction here. Okay, can you hear me now? I think you can. There's a few words that you may not know so well, so I just want to go over this 4 or 5. The word felicity, which means happiness. The word cupidity, which means an equal balance of lust and greed. Sagacity, which simply means wisdom. Volatility, which means the rate at which something evaporates or disappears. And asininity, which means another word for stupidity. So I'll chant this little, recite this little poem for you, and then we'll discuss it. It exactly fits with Srila Prabhupada's purport and his explanation here. Where Krishna lives, felicity abounds. With pure simplicity and loving sensibility, all serve him with humility. But when a living entity rejects his true identity and out of sheer stupidity surrenders to cupidity, he loses all sagacity and with it all capacity to understand reality or curb his sensuality. Abandoning humility, he touts his own ability, forgetting his fragility and fortune's volatility. Immersed in asininity for what seems an infinity of lives devoid of piety, he suffers in anxiety till contact with God's devotee, perhaps of utmost brevity, awakens his affinity for words of the divinity. Perceiving the futility of all his imbecility, the soul regains his sanity and casts away his vanity. Endowed with new humility, he serves with all ability and growing spontaneity his guru and the deity. Regaining his identity, the wayward living entity returns to the fraternity of Krishna for eternity. So this is a little dramatic explanation of how we fall and are redeemed and go back to the spiritual world. So the first idea is that the spiritual world, unlike the material world, doesn't have duality. I mean, in the material world, there's some happiness and there's a lot of misery. And we try to forget the misery so we can enjoy those little drops of happiness. But as Prabhupada says in the Bhagavad Gita in a purport, the happiness we feel, the sensual pleasures, whether it's subtle sense pleasures or gross pleasures, is actually the worst enemy of the conditioned soul, because it fills us with ideas of repeating that happiness and makes us completely forget that we're not the body, that we're actually spiritual souls, and we certainly have no ideas of God. So we're living with Krishna very happily in the spiritual world for who knows how long, eons and eons. And with pure simplicity and loving sensibility, we serve him with humility. But some of us have forgotten or reject that true identity. This is our free will. We are Krishna's marginal potency, tatastha shakti, which means that we have a capability or the tendency to be influenced either by the material energy or the spiritual energy. And this is our minute free will. Free will has to be there, otherwise there's no meaning to the word love. Srila Prabhupada famously said, Krishna doesn't want us to love him at the point of a revolver. It's not love. So he gives us a little bit of free will. He has infinite free will. Whatever he wants to do, he does. But in order to exchange loving relations with his unlimited number of devotees in so many different varieties of rasas, he gives us free will. And so when we misuse that free will, we reject our true identity, and out of sheer stupidity, surrender to cupidity. It means that instead of loving Krishna, we try to love and engage in the material energy and enjoy our senses. So this is nicely described in the 4th chapter of the Adi Lila by Krishna's Kaviraj, the distinction between prema and kama. Prabhupada says famously at the end of the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita that kama is simply prema that has been adulterated and perverted by contact with the modes of nature. So he says, Atmandriya priti vanche tare bali kam. Krishnandira priti vancha tare bali kam, or prema nam, I'm sorry. So the idea is that when we want to satisfy our own senses, that's called kama. But when we want to satisfy Krishna's senses, that's called prema. So as soon as we turn away from Krishna, then we become absorbed in this world of duality called Dravida, the second energy beside the internal energy. And this produces great fear because we forget our relationship with Krishna and we forget how secure and happy we are in the spiritual world. So this is explained in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam by the 9 Yogendras. Vayam Dvitiya Banavesha Takshad Isha Tapetasya Viparhiyo Asmriti. As soon as we turn away from the Isha, the Supreme Lord, Krishna, Isha Tapetasya, and become absorbed in the Dvitiya, in the dualities of this world, as Srila Prabhupada so nicely quotes there from the Bhagavad Gita, then we get overwhelmed with fear and we forget everything. Asmriti. And our natural position becomes reversed. Viparya. Instead of being servants of Krishna, we become his competitors. And since we are by nature his servants, we're in an unnatural position. And in this world, which is actually like a reformatory, it's a prison, we strive very hard to enjoy, and we're defeated every lifetime, and we suffer the threefold miseries: birth, old age, disease, and death in 8,400,000 species. Until, so this goes on. We abandon humility, and we are very proud of our body, whatever species it is, human body or whatever. And we forget how fragile our situation is here. This COVID-19 pandemic has reminded everyone in the world how tenuous our situation is. Who hasn't been disturbed by this pandemic? And anyone in the whole world who's a human being. So it's changed everything. And all it is one of the threefold miseries is coming up very prominently. What's unusual is that it's hitting everyone at once. So in one sense, for devotees, it's a reminder of how serious we have to be, that nobody can count on so many years and so many steps, that we need to get very serious about our devotional service so that we'll be ready when nature takes its course and we have to leave this body. So, but in this situation, we forget our fragility and we forget how volatile is fortune. We may work so hard, we may be successful due to our karma, accumulating a certain amount of wealth, a family, and so forth, but all of that can be gone in a second. And it comes and goes, just like we know that Lakshmi is often called Chanchala. She doesn't stay with anyone for very long. You may be very wealthy now, but you can lose it in this life. You certainly lose it at the time of death. Krishna, Prabhupada would always quote, Mrityu sarvaharashchaham. Krishna says, as death, I take everything away. So immersed in asininity means maintaining this delusion, life after life, for seemingly an infinity of lives. How many births of Brahma have we transpired since we've been wandering in this material world, up and down the different species, the different planets, and we're helpless because every time we get born in a non-devotee family, we have no idea, and we're in a certain environment and we're stuck again. So what's the solution? We can't save ourselves. We need help from Krishna directly, or more usually his representative. So this happens. We suffer in anxiety. There's so much fear, anxiety as there is today, till contact with God's devotee, perhaps of utmost brevity. Now, some of you may recognize the verse there. What does it say? Sadhu Sangha Sarva Shastra Koi, Lavamatra Sadhu Sangha Sarva Siddhi Hoy. That all the Shastra declare that association with the sadhu, Sadhu Sangha. And when we repeat like that, it's great emphasis. All the Shastra declare that association with a genuine devotee, which is what a sadhu is. Prabhupada would always quote the Bhagavad Gita, Bhajate Mam Ananya Bhak, as the definition of a sadhu, worshiping me without deviation. Even for a moment, lavamatra, half a moment. Lavamatra sadhu sange, this association, sarva siddhi hoy, can lead to complete perfection. Now, how is that? Because the real sadhus, they're not in the same mindset as we are. They're fully aware of their relationship with Krishna, and they're staying in the material world simply to try to bring others to Krishna's lotus feet. And so we experienced that with Srila Prabhupada, this whole movement of Krishna consciousness, that his getting on that boat, his great sacrifices to prepare, writing I know what it's like to try to put out a book with a whole team of devotees. You mentioned my little biography there, how we worked for 6 years to put out the 6 books comprising the remainder of the 10th canto, 11th canto, 12th canto. Well, Srila Prabhupada, working all alone, in 4 years, he was able to produce the first canto. Those famous books you may have seen, they have facsimiles. I have a set of the originals. So, and with those books, he felt he had real ammunition that he could start his movement and actually be successful with Krishna's mercy. But it was anything but easy. Great sacrifice. He was risking his life, almost lost his life on the boat. You know the story, heart attacks. And then when the movement actually took root, And it was still a struggle all the time, traveling and preaching and dealing with so many difficulties. And all out of his compassion, simply to give us, he's fixed at Krishna's lotus feet. He's enjoying within the pleasure that Prahlad Maharaj was saying, anytime I want, I can immerse my mind in nectar simply by chanting your glories. So you would study Prabhupada's life that he in the 12 years that we had, and we know from the biographies, he's simply glorifying Krishna, writing, speaking to whoever would hear him. And once he got this society going, he would travel constantly. And wherever he went, give classes, meet with people, always writing in the middle of the night, completely immersed in the nectarian task of glorifying Krishna and bringing others closer to Krishna, for the very reason of here, contact with God's devotee, either directly or through his words, which he said was even more important, because those words, they're always available. And if we're receptive to them, then that plants the seed, can plant the seed of bhakti, which we can then cultivate with hearing and chanting. So that's why it says, even the utmost brevity of association with a great devotee, pure devotee, can awaken the affinity for words of the divinity. This affinity for words of the divinity, if you'll forgive me to dwell on my little couplet there, is the key to advancement. If you study the Srimad Bhagavatam, right in the 2nd chapter, there's a section there which we made into a book. We call it the Dharma, the Way of Transcendence. That's from 1st canto, 2nd chapter, text 6 through text about 21. And it deals with Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha there. What's real Dharma? That's the first answer. Real Dharma is that which awakens pure love for Krishna. It's not something that is meant to result in material prosperity. He rejects that. It's not meant for that. And real moksha means being fixed at the lotus feet of Krishna, and therefore being free from all of the knots, all of the desires that bind us to this world. And there's so many devotees in the Srimad Bhagavatam that exhibit that, just like Maharaj Ambarish. We've just been hearing about him in class. He was a great king, seemingly involved in so many material subjects, but his real attention was fixed on Krishna. Savaimana Krishna Padada Bandayo Bachansi Vaikunta Gunanavanade. His mind was fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. His words were glorifying Krishna. With his hands, he was cleansing the temple or doing other services. With his feet, he's walking. All the senses, both active and knowledge acquiring, he has linked to Krishna in devotional service. And so when the Vasa Muni became stupidly angry at him for breaking the fast before, during the time, the Ekadashi fast, and therefore supposedly offending him by not waiting till he finishes his bath. You know the story. He became enraged because he's not a devotee, completely lost it, and tried to kill him with a kritya, is a female fire demoness. But Maharaj Ambarish, he didn't flinch. He's just whatever Krishna has in mind. And the chakra came, Krishna had already given him the chakra. The chakra arrived, killed the demon, and went after Devasa Muni. So Devasa, he was not liberated. He was overwhelmed with fear. Just as he was overwhelmed with anger, now he's overwhelmed with fear. And he went all the way up to Narayan and the Vaikuntha and asked him to please take your chakra back. Take it. He says, I can't. I'm controlled by my devotees. You have to go down and get the mercy of Ambarish, which of course Ambarish, saved him that way. So the practice of devotional service includes all other benefits, such as liberation. So now, after the contact with God's devotee, even though there must brevity, and the affinity for the words of the divinity are awakened, then if one is intelligent, one will seek out more of that association. And that means reading Srila Prabhupada's books. If you're far from a temple, getting online to the right sites where you can hear and get some association, see deep. And most importantly, being able to gather with others. Because now we have the COVID, it's a little bit difficult, but that's what the temples are for. So we can see the Lord. He so mercifully comes as the deity, where we can see him and serve him, because we can't see pure spirit right now. But this is all purifying us. purifying us of the disease of separatism, which is how we came here. Itcha dvesha samutena. Cultivating the desire, the itcha to serve Krishna, and the hate of not serving Krishna. In other words, just the opposite. It means reversing our mentality. So this, if we're fortunate, we perceive the futility of all of our imbecility, and realize we've made a big mistake, and now we have to cultivate our natural position as devotees. So we regain our sanity, cast away our vanity. Now this is the first step of getting knowledge. If you recall, in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives a summary of what knowledge is in about 20 points. And he begins, begins with pridelessness. This word mana is very famous. Lord Chaitanya is describing the mood with which we can chant constantly. Because in this age, that's the great salvation, is that the chanting of the holy name is a complete process. It can take us right back to God, but it all depends on the quality of the chanting. So it begins with this humility. So that humility before the guru, before the devotees, before the Lord, that opens up the channel, and we can get the actual mercy of all of those transcendental personalities. So then what happens? Endowed with new humility. So you remember, it started where we cast away our humility, because all the devotees are serving Krishna in the spiritual world with great felicity and great humility. So that when we turn away, we lose that humility, we become proud. So that pride has to be given away, cast away, and we engage in service, practical service. Prabhupada always translated bhakti as devotional service, because that bhakti is multidimensional. It's not just thinking of Krishna, and it's not just speaking of Krishna. It's hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, using all of our senses and our mind and our intelligence in the service of the Lord. And that's why we find so many details, the nectar of devotion, how to engage, what's the proper mood of hearing and chanting, and which is the foundation, and cultivating that remembrance, and also so many details of deity worship, which is practical, how you use your senses. Because as Krishna again says at the end of the 3rd chapter, this kama, which is really our enemy, this material desire which keeps us bound in this world birth after birth, has taken up the strategic positions in our being. What is that? The senses, the mind, and the intelligence. So it's not just a question of the mind, working with the mind like the yogis, like that, and trying to repress the senses. That doesn't work. It's especially not going to work for us in this age. Who's going to go up to the Himalayas or anything? But even in our very jobs, in our marriage, in our daily life, to spiritualize, or Prabhupada famously said, Krishnaize everything. And there's instructions how to do it. There are examples and specific instructions how we can be grahastas and spiritualize our family life. That's also very common in Vaishnav circles. There's so many grahastas who the family life is a way in which the husband helps the wife helps the husband to be Krishna conscious. The children are also raised in a Krishna conscious family, and the home becomes a little temple, or as far as possible to do that. So this process is taught by the guru and by the shastra, of course, and we get the help from the super soul, the who's always giving our knowledge, intelligence, right, and forgetfulness. So he's also guiding us, and in this way we have a good chance of succeeding if we're sincere. So with growing spontaneity, now this we serve the guru and the deity. So that spontaneity is our natural state. As spontaneous as we are to enjoy the senses in our conditioned state, will be that real spontaneity is there for serving Krishna's senses, because that's the real pleasure of the living entity. This is the secret of success in devotional life, is that recognizing that our real enjoyment, and beyond what we can even imagine in our conditioned state, is there in giving the Supreme Soul enjoyment. We are part and parcel of Krishna, right? Vibhinangsha. Angsha means a part and parcel. Mamai Vangsha Jiva Loki. That Angsha means that we have the qualities of Krishna in minute degree, and we're part and parcel of him. So it's just like, this famous analogy, it's in the Bhagavatam actually, pouring water on the root of the tree, you see? Well, that nourishes the branches and the leaves and the flowers and the fruits. If you try to water them separately, you'll fail, they'll dry up. The whole process is watering the root, feeding the stomach, so that all the senses can become enlivened, you see? So when we give pleasure to Krishna, because we're part and parcel of Krishna, then we also experience ecstasy and bliss just by Krishna being pleased. And that's what rasa is. That's what bhakti is, the exchange of love between the living entity and the Supreme Lord. And there's unlimited varieties of that. Especially in this age, that exchange is most prominently expressed in kirtan, sankirtan. Since the name of Krishna is non-different from Krishna, when we're serving the name by chanting with love and devotion and enthusiasm and hearing with great attention, then that's direct association with Krishna. The purification is taking place, and we can achieve the highest levels of bhakti just by that one process. It's complete. What does it say? Purna Shuddho Nitya. Purna means complete. Nitya Mukto Abhinat Vanama Namino. That the name is non-different from that which is named with Krishna. So this is true of everything in Krishna consciousness, but most prominently with the sound. The name is especially in this age. But when Prabhupada would point out he would like to give examples. I listen to lectures all the time, and he's speaking in India, and he would give examples of these Westerners who would come. And here's young Westerners who, attractive looking, young girls, young boys, and they're not concerned so much with their appearance anymore. The brahmacharis are walking out in their simple clothes, and even the ladies are not, spending hours preening in front of the mirrors or anything. They're spending time, dressing the deity and making sure that the deity looks nice, and that's fully satisfying. Fully satisfying to see Krishna smiling with the ornaments that you put on and all. Yeah, any pujari will tell you. And that's why pujaris often last a long time. If they get a nice pujari service, you'll see 20, 30 years later, they're still there because it's so fulfilling and ecstatic. So this is it's completely inconceivable to the material mind how someone can go on year after year chanting the same mantra, right? Worshipping the same deity, not having any gross sensual activities, being austere, and yet being very satisfied and happy and in Krishna consciousness, because they have put that barrier up because of that material mentality, the modes of nature. They prevent you from seeing the logic or the possibility of this. So Srila Prabhupada, because he was able to plant that seed of faith in his first devotees, and they were willing to hear him and to chant, they also experienced that to whatever degree they could, and they did, and they were able to plant the faith in others, and the whole movement grew that way because it's real and it really works. So this is this little ditty that I wrote really illustrates the process in summary, of course. But we need to get that affinity for words of the divinity, that attraction, and so much of that section, I highly recommend it. First canto, second chapter, beginning text 6, and a lot of it keys on developing the desire for hearing. Describe that Dvarnashram really means working in one's occupation, but with the underlying desire and goal to please Krishna. Atak pumbid vida shrestha varnashrama vibhagasha sonasitasya dharmasa samsidhir haritoshanam. That in all the 4 divisions of the social divisions and the 4 spiritual divisions, the goal is samsiddhi haritoshanam. The perfection is to satisfy Hari. And therefore he says, Tasmad ekena manasa bhagavan satpatam shortabhya kirtitavya sadheya puja sanitida. That one, therefore, with one pointed attention, one should hear about, chant about, worship, remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that will give one the sword of remembrance. Yanaruyasina karma granti nabandhanam. Chimdandi, one can cut the bondage of karma, which is from previous selfish activities and self-centered activities, are keeping us bound here. And so, Konakuya Katara team, who would not be interested in this kata, you see? Well, the conditioned souls aren't interested. And sometimes we, because we're coming from a conditioned state, are not as eager to hear and chant about Krishna and topics related to Krishna and Srila Prabhupada's books as we should be. So how do we develop that eagerness to hear? That's described. Shushusho Shadadhanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahatsevaya Vipra Punya Tirtana Shevanat. By serving the lotus feet of the pure devotees, one develops the affinity for the messages of Vasudeva. And then Krishna from within, he purifies those who are really hearing about him with sincerity. Shinvadam Sukata Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtana Ridyantaksto Yabadrani Vidunoti Suratsatam. It is a cleansing process, and Krishna is doing the cleansing from within our heart. He understands, oh, this devotee is now hearing about me with attention and devotion. So now he starts clearing away what's called the abhadras, the same as anartas, all the latent material desires and the fears and all the karma. So that's getting, and when it's cleansed to a certain degree, not completely, one comes to the point of nishta, firm faith. No one can convince you that Krishna is not God. No one can convince you that the process of bhakti will not take you to perfection. You've gotten rid of a lot of these anartas and you've experienced so much, and your ruchi is increasing more and more. That's ruchi is the first phase of attaining love for Krishna. Ruchi tada shakti, and then one develops personal attraction for Krishna, which matures into bhava and prema. But it's all described there in that second chapter. And we also made it into this book, as I mentioned, Dharma, the Way of Transcendence, with Srila Prabhupada's purports appended, just like with the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev and the teachings of Queen Kunti. So we should all have our aspiration to return to the fraternity of Krishna for eternity. Fraternity here means the spiritual world, where everyone's, loving Krishna in various ways. And that's who we really are. We're not, I'm not an American. Most of you are maybe of Indian descent, but that's just externals. We're all servants of Krishna in our different varieties. And we have the wonderful unity amongst devotees is that Krishna is in the center. And then we can appreciate each other so much, and we can easily become enlivened just by glorifying Krishna together or serving Krishna together and relishing his pastimes and the pastimes of the devotees. This is the real pleasure of the devotees. So just to review, one thing is this issue of how we fell from the spiritual world. Some of you may not be aware, it became a philosophical issue in the 90s, where there was a certain strain saying, well, we never were in the spiritual world. But Srila Prabhupada it turns out, he was asked this question to clear it up back in the early 70s by one of his devotees named Madhudvish Swami, who has passed away. He was the GBC for Australia at the time. And one of his devotees there, I think it was the president of either Sydney or Melbourne, he was reading Prabhupada's books. Nobody read anything else besides Prabhupada's books at that time. And he was picking out a quote here and there to seem to cast doubt on the fact that we were ever in the spiritual world, that we fell from the Brahma Jyoti or something like that. So Madhudvish Swami, he asked Prabhupada to give some definitive explanation, write something or dictate something, which he did. And it's called the Crow and Towel letter, which I'll explain why it's called that. But Srila Prabhupada, he explained, it's very fascinating, that in one sense, we've never left the spiritual world. Because you remember in the Bhagavad Gita, right in the second chapter, it says that the soul is immovable. In other words, we don't really go anywhere because we're already in the spiritual world, we're in the spiritual kingdom. But what happens is our consciousness changes, and we're thinking, we're dreaming all of these different bodies in these different situations. And the dream is so real that we're taking it as the all in all. We forgot the reality and we're living in the dream, one dream after another. There's one verse in the Bhagavatam that's given 5 times. Now you know this is an important verse. So here's what it says. Arte hibidimane pi sankshati nanavartate dhyayado vishayanasya swapne nartagamo yata. It says, in reality, the sufferings of samsara, birth and all these, are basically unreal. But just as the sufferings in a nightmare don't cease until you wake up, so the sufferings of birth and death and all of these things that we've been going through will not cease until we actually wake up to the reality of our spiritual identity and live in that identity. So in that context, Srila Prabhupada says, falling from the spiritual really means falling asleep and dreaming all of these different situations. But once we go back to the spiritual world, it means waking up, and it will seem like just a split second we were gone. And we'll resume our activities in relation to Krishna, our specific rasa. So that's very fascinating. But one of the sentence that he mentions there, which is kind of the quote that wraps it all up, says, formerly we were with Krishna in his lila or sport. Not that we came from the Brahma Jyoti or some other situation, but we were established in our original rasa. But as I said, and as Prabhupada has said many times, because of our free will, a certain number of us, minority, try to compete with Krishna rather than to serve Krishna. And we start our dreamlike existence, one body after another in this material world. So when we wake up, it's like waking up. Uttishta jagrata prapavarana bodhata. There's so much of that in our literature. Wake up, get up. The Upanishads say, realize the great treasure you have in the material, in the human form of life. And this is another thing I wanted to mention. I'm glad I remembered it. Is that this is often a theme in Srila Prabhupada's talks, and that is that human life is very rare. There's only 400,000 species, but forget the species for a minute and just think of the number of human beings. Oh, now we're at 7.5 billion. But what is that compared to the insects and the ants and the birds and all the trees and the grass? There's trillions and uncounted quadrillions of other living entities in other bodies which who have no hope of any kind of self-realization, God realization. They're just living out their sentence till they get back up to the human form. And even amongst the human beings, as I'm sure you're aware, there's very, very few who are even asking the right questions. Where did I come from? Why am I suffering? What's the source of everything? Which Sanatana Goswami was asking to Lord Chaitanya. So we're so fortunate having come in touch with this movement and the books of Srila Prabhupada and sincere devotees like our leaders in ISKCON. And so we should take advantage of it without delay. And I'll share with you 2 verses that Prabhupada always quote, and then we'll have some questions. The one that he would quote most often in this regard, Labdvasu durlamabidam bahu sambhavante manusyamarta damanityamapi adhira turnam yateta nabateta namityavat nikshaya saya vishaya kalusarva taksyat. Directly to this point, he said, I think it's Krishna speaking in the 11th canto, Uddhava Gita. Labdvasu durlabam idam bahu sambhavante manusham. Manusham is a human form. My dear human being, you have attained this rare form, sudurlabam, very rare. Labdvasu durlabam idam bahu sambhavante, after many, many births in lower forms. And what's the unique quality of this human form? Manusham artadam. This word arta, or svarta, more precisely, means the actual goal of the soul, which is to get free from this imprisonment of life, birth, old age, disease, and death, and go back to Godhead. So only the human form can give that benefit when we use it properly. But like every other form, whether it's Brahma down to the little ant, it's temporary, anityam. And so one has to be dhira. One has to be dhira. This word is used several times in the beginning of Lord Chaitanya's instructions to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. So dhira means one has to be calm and consider everything and from the spiritual point of view, not just the material senses and material mind. So then, having understood this instruction, turnam yateta, one has to strive without wasting a second. We don't know how much time we have left. Turnam yateta napadena, as long as you haven't fallen down and died, you still have some facility to serve. Anumitya, because Mrityu is following you on your shoulder at all times. The death is there. We never know when it will come. And what should you strive for? This is the key. Nikshayasa, the ultimate good. Not some temporary thing, shreyas and prayas, some immediate or even deferred sense gratification, but the ultimate good, which is getting free of birth and death and returning to our original place at the lotus feet of Krishna in the spiritual world for eternity. Vishayakala sarvataksha, because after all, you've experienced all varieties of sense gratification already. Been there, done that, as we say. This is a motto. So don't be bewildered. Punak punascharvatacharma, chewing the chewed. Find out what that ultimate goal is. Associate with those who are on the path, and especially with one who's there already, pure devotee, and do what's necessary to progress as fast as possible. And the last verse I'll quote is another one which compares the human body to a boat. There's a lot of boats in Bhagavatam, and this is one of them, famous boat verse. Nirdehamadyam sulabam sudurlabam, Nirdehamadyam sulabam sudurlabam plabam sukalpam gurukarnadharam mayanukulyena nabasviteritam puman bhavabdim natare sa'atmaha. So Nirdeha means the human body. Adyam means it's full of all kinds of good facilities. Sulabam sudurlabam. Now here, Krishna's a play on words because these words are opposite. Sulabam means easily gotten, and sudurlabam means very difficult. Well, which one is it? It's both. Easy to get means you always get it. In other words, every living entity, the most sinful, most demonic, eventually they come back again after who knows how many births in lower species of plants, come back to the human form. So in that sense, it's sudurlabam, it's sulabam. But sudurlabam means, as we're explaining in the other verse, very rare. So what is it? A very plavam, boat. So the body, this human body is a boat. I mean, we're in an ocean, the ocean of birth and death. Sukalpam, very nicely constructed, just what we need. Guru Karnadaram, then you need a captain for the boat, and that captain is the guru, the bona fide spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada would say, who can instruct us and whom we can take shelter of. But then this is a sailboat. We need the favorable winds. So Krishna says, my words in the Vedas, and especially Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, the books Prabhupada has given us, Maya Nukuli and Abasviteta, favorable breeze. So we got the perfect boat, we have the captain, and we have the favorable winds. Puman Bhavabdim Natare Sa'atmaha. So that human being who doesn't cross over birth and death with all these facilities is Atmaha. He's virtually committing spiritual suicide. In other words, postponing his chance for who knows how many millions of years. So let's not even think about that. We'll take advantage of this wonderful boat, facilities we've been given, and work as hard as we can to make as much advancement as we can, going back to God. And who knows, maybe we'll go back in this very lifetime. So it's 4:50. Do we have time for questions? Hare Krishna?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay.
Yes, Prabhu.
So if there's any questions or discussion, we can entertain it for a few minutes. Otherwise, I have a few more poems I can give you. Hello?
Dear devotees, any questions, please go ahead and ask.
Yeah, just unmute yourself. Oh, Nitya Krishna to everyone. What is meant by spiritual warrior? Is that you? I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. I think I got. Is that the question? What is it? What is a spiritual warrior?
Yes, Prabhu. What is meant by spiritual warrior?
Okay.
Yeah.
Dandavat pranam to you, Nitya Krishna. Well, this was a phrase that was made famous by Bhakti Tirtha Swami, I think he wrote a book about that, or maybe several books. And I think what it focuses on is that we have to be to recognize that just like Arjun, we're also on a battlefield, meaning that Maya is not going to give up easily. She has so many weapons in her arsenal to try to distract us, to try to lure us away or scare us away from devotional service. And so we have to develop a certain amount of courage in challenging Maya, knowing that we have the greatest weapon of the holy name, and that we have the instructions of the Guru and instructions of Krishna. If we follow them, that we'll be protected. So we're on a kind of a battlefield in this material world, because everywhere we look, there are Maya's kingdom. The three modes of nature are very powerful. So we have to become spiritually strong, and be able to resist Maya's both sides. There's two sides. One is the allurements to try to enjoy, and the other are the things that we're afraid of and that we want to try to avoid. Sometimes, because in Krishna consciousness, sometimes the challenge is, okay, this is a challenge. You have to go out and distribute books, or you have to do some difficult service. It can come from any direction. Sometimes it's a challenge, a health crisis we may have, to stay Krishna conscious at that time, and so many other ways. So we need to build up our spiritual muscles and to develop the weapons. And so our greatest weapon is the holy name and all of the other wonderful prayers and vibrations that we have. Just like before I started, there was a nice little kirtan going on, and you sung these prayers to Lord Nrsingadev. So I remember my own editing career. Of course, we were singing those. It wasn't always that we sang those. I think they began when there was an attack on one temple, and Srila Prabhupada taught those prayers to us. But I remember working on the fifth canto. Now they're not so famous as, of course, Prahlad's prayers to Nrsingadev in the seventh canto, but there's a series of prayers by Prahlad Maharaj and others, residents of Jambudvipa offer prayers. And one of them is not a verse exactly, it's prose. There's a lot of prose in the fifth canto, Sanskrit prose. And at the end of the purport, it's a prayer. And at the end of the purport, Prabhupada says, anyone who wants to be free of material desires should pray to the Nrsingadev as Prahlad Maharaj does in this verse. So as soon as I read that, even in manuscript form, I immediately memorized the verse. I call it a verse. So here's the verse, and you can see he's taking the role of a conditioned soul, as the great souls often do in praying. Om Namo Bhagavate Narasinghaya Namastejas Tejase Avadavim Bhavavadhanaka Badhadangshta Karma Shayan Randhaya Randhayatamo Grasa Grasa Om Svaha Abhyam Abhyamatmani Buhishta Om Kshaum. So that syllable, Kshaum, this is the seed mantra, Bij syllable for Nrsingadev. And it's almost like you can hear him ripping apart Hiranyakashipu. Kshaum, Kshaum. It's not like Krishna is clean or Radharani is Shreem, but this is, So he's on battlefield, Nrsingadev has killed Hiranyakashipu. So what does he say? Om Namo Bhagavate, I offer my obeisance to you, Lord Nrsingadev. Namastejas Tejase. And now repetition means a high emotion and intensity. So there's a lot of repetition. I offer my obeisance to you, the most powerful of the powerful. Tejase Avadavir Bhava. Please be manifest in my heart. Vajranaka, Vajradangshta. And with your thunderbolt-like fangs and your thunderbolt-like teeth, like nails and thunderbolt-like fangs, then rip apart my material desires. Vajranaka, Vajradangshta, Karmashayan, my aspirations for fruit of activity. That's what Karmashayan means. Randaya, rip them apart. Randaya, tamo grasa, grasa, dispel the darkness in my heart. Om Svaha, I offer my oblations unto you. Abhyam Atmani, please be manifest in my heart and make me fearless in this material world. So this is a recognizing our position as it's a struggle, but that by calling out the name of Krishna, calling and learning these prayers, uttering them, we can be fortified in this battle and become spiritually strong, so we can overcome our own weaknesses and be firmly fixed at the lotus feet of Krishna. And that's my view on the spiritual warrior question. Any other questions or comments? Okay, how about a couple of more little poems here? This is one I wrote on a Vyas Puja day for Srila Prabhupada, and then I kind of transformed it so it can be uttered on any day. O Prabhupada, we hail the day when you appear just like a ray of Krishna's vast effulgence bright to give this blind world back its sight. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts and pray with deepest love that we may serve your lotus feet in every circumstance we meet. As years go by and books go out, we see what life is all about, to serve your mission and our Lord's by spreading wide your sacred words. As well, you want us all to strive to let those words direct our lives. This safest path will lead us home, no more in Maya's realm to roam. Hare Krishna.
One more question from Mataji in the chat, Prabhu.
Okay, go ahead. Am I going to see it?
Question is, can woman be Sita for the honor of parents to bring them into ISKCON, at the same time become Urmila for Lakshmana to become a spiritual warrior?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part.
First part is, can woman be Sita for honor of parents to bring them into ISKCON, at the same time become Urmila for Lakshmana to become a spiritual warrior?
I'm not exactly understanding. You want Sita to be able to bring her parents, like you're talking about Ram Leela now, because it's Ram Vijayotsava? Is that what we're doing here? Are we remembering the Ramayana?
This is a question from Nitya Krishna Mataji. Mataji,
Okay.
Please go ahead, unmute and ask.
It worked nice with the chat. I was able to read it.
It is there in the chat, Prabhu. In the same chat.
Ah, okay, I see. Can women be Sita for honor of parents to bring them into ISKCON, at the same time become Urmila for Lakshman to become a spiritual warrior? I'm not sure I can even understand what's going on. So was Urmila Lakshman's wife? Was that it? I'm not sure.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So you want to know if the ladies can also be spiritual warriors. That's one thing. And for honor of parents to bring them into ISKCON. Well, the ladies should try to bring their parents into ISKCON if it's at all possible. The advantage of the parents of a devotee is that there's an attraction there, and therefore they're sympathetic. They'll listen to them. I remember my parents; they were just regular Western parents, but especially my mother. She wanted to know what I was doing, so she became this is back in the 70s. She became a subscriber to Back to Godhead magazine. And eventually, years go by, and my father passed away in 87. I had trouble getting through to him. But my mother became very interested. And I remember visiting her. She was living in an assisted living place. And we're doing a kirtan. I had Prabhupada going, and we were dancing together, And at the week before she left her body, I introduced her to japa. And we chanted for a good 10 minutes. And she was able to chant just, a couplet at a time. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And so I felt that was very auspicious. She was able to do some serious japa, and she was pronouncing perfectly. So we should try to help our parents because they're attached to us. If we're devotees, then they'll listen, hopefully listen to us. And we can, sometimes bring them around to be real sincere devotees. As far as Urmila for Lakshman, the idea is that because Lakshman was a warrior, So Urmila, who's the wife, right, of Lakshman, therefore she should take after her husband and become a fixed up devotee and a fighter for Krishna. I mean, we've had devotees in this movement who've been very, very brave, especially in preaching, book distribution. In the early days, it's definitely not, in the Vedic culture, for single ladies to go out and become serious preachers, but they did it, and they would sometimes did an extraordinary amount of preaching. And today, we have some very wonderful preachers in the movement who are ladies, especially Irma Devi Dasi, who's very intelligent. I mean, she's got degrees and she's written books and she's published books from others. So yes, I mean, we all have our specific battleground that we're on. Sometimes it's in the family to try to infuse our children with devotion. That can be a fight also in the modern age. So we have to pick our battles that we can win and engage full-heartedly, and we'll get the mercy of the Guru and Krishna to give us the strength. Now you're asking a question, I don't know. Did Urmila not come back as Vimla Devi, and only Jagannath gave her value for her sacrifice? I don't know. You have to ask the next speaker. My mind, so much time I spend the day working with the. Is this right? Should this be a comma or a period? And sometimes I find some interesting where it talks about Prabhu. Ram is killing Ravana. Ravana is. Prabhu calls about the tingling of the bow of Ravana and of Ram. And we say, well, the word is vispurjiyat, and I looked up that word. Is mentioned quite a few times elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, and it's the twanging of the bow. So if I find something like that, then I adjust it, and for posterity. A lot of my mind is in trying to work with the books in that way and refine them a little bit. So I don't have so much time to read the Ramayana again and again and get into all these details. That's who I am. All right, one last little poem here, and then I'll let you go. I have to get going because I also have to be at the temple at 5:30 my time. So this is the beginning of chapter 21 of the 10th canto. This is the famous Venu Geet chapter. There's a beautiful description of the autumn season arriving and Krishna's entering into the forest. And then there's this famous verse, Barha Pidam Natavadavapu. So I'll give you these two verses and then my little rendition of the English. And you can, by the way, I can send you, who's corresponding, I'll send you my poetry file, and it has all these poems in it and many more. Vrindavan's rivers, lakes, and hills ring out with charming hums and trills as flocks of birds and maddened bees rejoice among the flowering trees. To those idyllic woods and glens repairs Govinda with his friends, Sri Rama and the cowherd boys, to taste the most exquisite joys. And as they walk along the way, absorbed in herding and in play, Sri Krishna, beauty absolute, begins to blow his mystic flute. With peacock plume upon his head and fragrant flower on each ear, he enters Brudge's with his tread sublime, a dancer without peer. His golden yellow raiment glows, his garland reaches to his knees, and from his lips the nectar flows and fills his flute with melodies. As Krishna thus begins his day, with friends who sing his glory sweet, he beautifies the forest way with fine impressions of his feet. And that's our contribution for today. Thank you very much for inviting me. Is it Saroj, who's my host? I see your name is first.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is Krishna Amanandas.
Haribol.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for enlightening us, giving us the details on what has happened, whether we fall from the spiritual world or what is our actual position. Because Prabhupada is always interested to, or always emphasized. So not say that, oh, somebody said this, somebody said, who are they? I mean, so he's always based on the scriptures. He always, from the Shastra, he gives, confidently tells everything. There is no guesswork. So thank you for presenting in the same way.
That was Prabhupada's example. He would always quote, and like that. So he tried to follow in his footsteps a little bit. Okay, I've got to go. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Let's say 3 times Lord Hari Bol for Prabhuji. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Praise Dravida Prabhu.
Oh my
Prabhupada.
God.
Jai.
Hari Bol.
Quick announcements. Tomorrow, Monday, is Ekadasi, and we have Ekadasi Kirtan. Jai Prakash Prabhu has posted. So tomorrow, in 7 to 9. And please join the Zoom session. And the October 31st, Damodar month is starting. Please take the opportunity to engage in the following the vrata, taking the sankalpa before and ending with sankalpa. And then attend with the face mask and the safe distance in the temple if possible, which will be posted the details. The next week we have 31st Saturday, we have His Grace again. Dravida Prabhu is giving class on Bhagavad Gita. And then we have November 1st, Sunday morning, His Grace Mukunda Datta Prabhu, another scholar, BBT editor, proper disciple, is giving class 8 to 9. And then in the evening, His Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj is giving class on Sunday evening, November 1st. So please take this opportunity in Kartik month. And yeah, thank you. Hare Krishna. All goes to Prabhupada. All goes to all the wonderful Vaishnavas. Hare Krishna. Gaur Bhakta Vandana.
Hari Bol.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.